Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Hi, John. How are you doing today?
Good, Dan. I'm really well, and it's nice to be here with you. And it's we're almost going on to 3 years here, Dan.
I know it's unbelievable, isn't it? It goes
It's
so fast.
unbelievable. It goes so fast, yeah. And I think we've had so many guests from all kinds of places, organizations, perspectives, and it's just so rich. I'm going to ask people a small favor. And I've noticed when people do podcasts, they always say, "Oh, go to and rate us, give us a
Yeah,
star or something." We've never asked that,
we
so
need to do that.
could you please do that if you think what you're listening to is of interest? And I do want to thank all the people that reach out to us through our LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn group, and people are always sharing really positive messages. We got another group that started a podcast based on something that we did. You remember, Dan, with Julie Walker
Sure.
and Brogan about
Yeah,
culture adults. And they decided to do a podcast about Americans living abroad based on what we did. So I thought those are just some nice connections.
definitely.
But today, I'm very excited because the organization we have is the International Educator, Thai Online. And I would imagine that most people that are international school educators either in the past had it as a newspaper in their faculty lounge or they're subscribing to it. It is one of the go-to places for international educators. They do phenomenal work. They support so many different organizations. And I know over the years they've been integral in really elevating and amplifying the work that educators do in the sphere of international schools. And I know often people look for jobs, there's workshops, and there's a lot of wonderful blogs that people are sharing. And today we have the director of Thai, Stacy Stephens. So what a privilege and honor. Thank you, Stacy, and welcome to International School Podcasts.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here and have this chat.
So I think we'd like to start off is you've transitioned from a leadership role in international schools
Mhm.
to being the director of an online newspaper. Is it still printed? Do you guys still send printed versions?
No, we don't. That really went away with COVID. Nobody wanted the newspaper with
It's a
COVID.
shame though, because every time I would visit an international school, it would always be there in the reception. You always read it. Like I got sent. I got sent a copy in the post for a while. Even so, it was. I missed the
Yeah,
printed edition.
no, we're completely online now. Everything's online. We all work online. We work remotely from all over the world. We sometimes have, I think it's 11 o'clock where I am right now. We have crazy meeting times sometimes because we're really a very global, very small, but very global team where really all of our work is online now and in the online space.
So tell me a bit about that transition. So you're in school leadership, you've worked in curriculum, you've worked in many different roles in international schools around the world. And suddenly now you're in an online newspaper. I like to call it a newspaper, or is it, how
I'd
do you
say,
define?
I'd say a newsletter because I think
Okay.
one of the things that I think is important to like distinguish between a newspaper and a newsletter is I think a newspaper we associate with journalism. And I think a newsletter we associate with sharing good news and good information with people. And we're definitely in the newsletter category of, really trying to just amplify and share voices from the international community and the good work that's happening in schools.
So how was that transition, Stacy? That's a very different kind of workflow. And as you're saying, it's 11
Totally.
o'clock, you're in Manila, you have people over the world. Just tell us a bit about your own journey,
Yeah.
transitioning to this.
So I actually repatriated home almost 2 years ago to be closer to elderly parents after being, I like to joke, locked out, locked in, and then locked in again in my journey between China and Malaysia. During COVID, I did I did COVID in 3 different countries. So after a little while with elderly parents, it was really time to come home, and I think I'm just very fortunate as having been a director of learning and having done this work for 20 years. Consulting work sort of comes your way, and I was thinking about going back into a school when Bambi Betts came knocking on my door, figuratively speaking. And when Bambi comes knocking, I'm going to talk to Bambi, because I think she's so well known in our community for the work that's been done with Thai and also PTC. And so she approached me with this idea of getting involved. And I think it's kind of interesting. My academic background is in economics. And so it's bringing a lot of different aspects of, I think, things that I've done at different parts in my career, whether it was from teaching or being in leadership, and kind of leveraging them in new ways, and really thinking about how do we mentor and share information and get more new people into the profession, because I think that that's going to be very needed, as the number of schools continue to grow. And so I always like doing different things, and this was different. It is different working from home. I joke now, I'm actually consulting right now in Manila, and I joke that I'm not like in work shape. Like I just can't stand for 8 hours a day. Like I can walk for 8 hours a day, but I'm not used to like standing still anymore, like in a classroom. So it's a big shift going back and forth between those two things. But for me, I have a nice balance of still going and working in schools and then supporting the work of Thai internationally. It's a nice balance of the two.
So tell us a bit. I think maybe it might be helpful for people that aren't familiar with you, would be kind of surprising. But hey, you never know. Why Thai? How did it start? And what is it? What if you had to, a Martian came and met with you, what would you say about its history?
Can you give the web address as well, just so people know where to find it? It would be good to do that up front, I guess.
Yes,
we'll put it in the show notes.
ThaiOnline.com is where you can find us. So Thai has been around for over 30 years. It was started by Forrest and Bambi Betts, who also run PTC as well. Bambi's very involved with that. And I think it really started as, again, back in that time, we didn't have the internet. Like, how were people going to find out about jobs? And as they were putting the newspaper out for jobs, they were putting news and stories from schools and advertising. And kind of like you had said, Dan, I am pretty sure I knew about my second job that I got in Argentina from seeing it in the Thai newspaper. Like I always remember it either showing up in my box 2 or 3 times a year, or always being in the faculty lounge. And so that's how you found out about jobs for those of us who are of a certain age. That's how you knew about the jobs. And so Thai had always been really, I would say, a recruiting platform, not a recruiting agency. Whereas it's more of a little bit more of a free market, a little bit more open, that you can, put your information and your details in there if you're interested in jobs, and schools can go in there. We don't host fairs, but really it's kind of a marketplace where we facilitate schools and candidates coming together, and then they have the opportunity to, make those connections outside of fairs. So in some ways we've been online long before we all had to start recruiting online. We've always been sort of putting people together in that manner for really, for 30 years is how this has been happening. And so I'd say that's really what Thai is. It's 2 sides to Thai. There's the recruiting side, and there is the newsletter side, which is really about sharing all the great things that are going on in our schools. And I think a place that Thai is evolving, because I think really a huge part of the mission is how do we elevate our work in schools. And between Thai and PTC and the International Standards of Practice, which I think are really important to the work that we're doing now and the new work that we're doing in the ways that we're innovating, is really trying to say, as we recruit and we look for the best teachers, do we have the best systems in place to find out what people can actually do? Can you show me instead of just tell me? And what are you going to show me against? And those are the standards of practice. And so I think that's been an innovation in the past several years for Thai, is to say, show me what you can do vis-a-vis these practices that are really, really critical for international schools. And so that's really kind of where we're at. And now we're really looking at growing into, how do you take those same standards of practice and how might we support growth and appraisal in schools, so that we're continuing to reflect on our practices through really an evidence-based approach. And so that's kind of who Thai is now. We've been one thing, and I think a lot of people know us as the newsletter, but I think it's really a lot more than that. And that's been the way that they've been innovating and growing in the space the past several years.
So with these standards of practice for international school teachers, and you're talking about developing a whole framework to support schools. Do schools then approach you and say, hey, could you come and help us, or are you just creating platforms and giving information out, and then people take it and customize it to their liking?
Yeah, they're really, people take it and customize it to their liking and make it relevant to their school, depending on the level of customization they feel like they may need. The ideas that they have been worked with across a group of people to make them and ensure that they're international. James Strong, Kim Marshall, the PTC, ALOC all kind of came together to say, what is distinctive about international teaching? So there's a part about being culturally competent. There's a part
Yeah.
about serving the linguistic needs of, multilingual learners. That's very specific to our context. So I think a lot of schools can really pick them up and really use them from there and show me the evidence of that and the reflection on that. And then I think some schools go and they take it they take it a little bit farther and unpack it further for their context and their environment. But they are on both our websites, PTC and TIE, and there's several sets of standards. They're for teachers, teacher leaders, principals, heads of schools, systems people. Like we're all systems people on the side of the thing in schools. And so that's another place that we've really kind of created a lot of different sets of standards to support the various roles that you find in schools beyond just teaching.
Is it then an aggregation of a lot of good practice that you as an organization have seen in many different schools? Because schools all have their standards, learning principles or community standards or even appraisal standards. So are you saying this is kind of a framework? This is a vanilla that all schools can live with? And you as an organization, through your research and the work that you've done, you've said, we've noticed this and we know from good research, this is
Yeah,
what makes a good teacher.
exactly. And then I think also really more taking the context of international schools into consideration more than maybe other standards that you might find from national programs and national systems, really trying to take that international lens exactly to say that these are strong practices for our schools and our kids. And I think also really kind of like gift our schools the potential for common language across schools, right? That we can share these things and we can use these things. And as teachers move around, that thinking, that knowledge, that understanding, that core language is portable and it goes with them. So that's really our goal, is to see more schools using the standards of practice, not only in their schools, but also for recruiting and making sure that we are finding teachers who are in alignment with the practices and the components of our schools that make us distinctly international.
Do you find certain types of obviously there's a lot of different types of international schools. Do you find certain types of school are more using the standards a lot more? Like, is it IB schools? Is it, the traditional not-for-profit schools? Is it small schools? Is there any kind of, the British international schools? Is there any kind of thing you've noticed?
I think a lot of people really come into contact with the standards through their courses through PTC
Yep.
and the teacher leadership training courses, because these are all used in all of these courses. And I think that's really one of the major vehicles in which they go into schools, is because people become exposed to them through
Yep.
these courses. So I don't know of any sort of trend in that, of like a certain type of school of one over another.
Yep.
In our recruiting portal, where we use the standards of practice in the recruiting portal, and candidates can go and build evidence, and then recruiters can then go and look at that. We serve so many different kinds of schools in the recruiting portal as well, that I wouldn't say it's more one over another.
Sure. Okay.
So if I'm let's just create a scenario. I'm a candidate, I'm a teacher, I've been teaching in a few other schools, and I get my profile onto TIE Online. Does that mean that I'm the assumption for now, the recruiter, Dan's the recruiter, and he says, oh, there's John Mickton. I now know that if he's on TIE Online, that he will be meeting the standards of practice for an international school teacher. Is there a vetting process, or no?
No, I think it's still the same that happens is, as a recruiter, you're still doing the vetting and you're doing the looking. And I think what we're trying to do is, by asking people it's going to be up to a teacher whether they want to put the evidence in there or not. And I think that says a lot to you as a recruiter, right? If someone chooses not to use the evidence-based portfolio of it, that's probably something that was going to kind of stand out to you as a recruiter. Whereas you're going to find the candidates who are really serious about recruiting are really filling in the evidence portfolio. And then you have an opportunity to look at the evidence, and then you can really gauge from your perspective in the work at your school when they try and demonstrate what their assessment practices are like. Are those in line with the kind of assessment practices that you're looking for? So it's really more the evidence part that adds an extra layer of vetting to the process. It's not vetting, that's still the teacher, it's still the candidate, it's still the recruiters that will do the vetting, but it adds an extra layer of rigor, for lack of a better word, and sort of upping the ante on how we're presenting ourselves as teachers. One of the things that I really enjoyed when I first did it is I did my own portfolio in there, and I had actually been in a recruiting process. I actually wrote about this on TIE. There's an article about how I was told that my cover letter was so well aligned with the job. Well, how did I write my cover letter? It was AI is what wrote my cover letter, of course. I was like, never got a compliment on a cover letter before until I let technology write it for me.
Mhm.
But it was really powerful having recruited and only being able to tell people what I've done. And when I was using the system standards and it was asking me, like, what are the ways in which I promote DEI practices in a school? And I was able to upload evidence of that.
Yeah.
And I was like, it was almost like a relief as somebody who was going through a recruiting process when I was playing with the portal to say, like, I can tell you what I've done, but I can also show you what I've done. And
Yeah.
we don't have that in our processes. It's how well do I present myself increasingly in an online environment? What do the people who worked with me say about me, rather than actually looking at the thing that's the most important thing that I do, which is the day-to-day work that I do for kids, and actually seeing that evidence. So like I personally, and just building out my own portfolio, found it so powerful to reflect on what is it that I do that demonstrates the quality of me as a candidate, and then be able to say, and here it is, you can now see it too. And I think that's really the big shift that we want to see, is we want to see candidates being able to put their best self forward through the lens of how they work and what they do with kids, and then for recruiters to have more information about candidates. And I think that this is really the big mission where we're at right now in our recruiting work at TIE.
Listening to you here, I'm just thinking, how come we have not been doing this for a long time? Because you bring up a good point. You interview somebody, they're charming, they do a good job online, they have the right connections, they know the right people, their resume looks good. But at the end of the day, you have no real idea. There's no evidence of this except this kind of invisible trust that we build. And so you say you're really good with classroom management, and you went to a workshop. So I'm just trusting you that you're good at classroom management. But the fact is, if I see a video of some strategies of you bringing kids together and having classroom management, I think it's extremely powerful. It's kind of interesting that this whole social contract that we've had over decades with international school teachers and educators is based really on the charm.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like, and especially think about it now that you're online. It's even more, like, how do you come across online? Do you have the personality? How do you present and, communicate energy? It becomes it's almost a distraction if somebody is very like poised and articulate. Like, it can be a distraction to actually digging through and getting to the quality of it. And again, like we talk about it, it's like triangulation of data. Of course, this matters. Of course, this interaction matters. Of course, your references matter. Now, show me some evidence. Like add that third point, that third data point in to kind of round out the process. Because I mean, as somebody who has recruited as well, it's laborious, it's expensive,
Yeah.
it's time consuming, and I've made mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. And if I'm going to put all of that time and all of that effort and energy, I'd like to minimize the chance of me making an error. And I have made mistakes as somebody who's hired before, and that becomes more laborious, more time, and sometimes more expensive on the other side of it if you
Absolutely.
really get it wrong.
Yeah. No, I've been in that same situation where you recruit somebody on the two points, the references and the charm,
Yeah.
and you forgot the evidence, and suddenly you're like, oh, this person is not what they think. Dan, I'm just curious because you hire a lot of people. Does this resonate, or is this something that you do? Do you think in industry people do it much more?
I mean, for me, it doesn't happen because, I mean, as you know, John, like we're like a very unique kind of organization in that, pretty much everyone who works for us worked for schools before. And how we've worked with people is, they'll work with us on a project and we'll pay them for the project. And then it goes well, they'll do more. That's how with James, with Peter, everyone. And then eventually they'll come full time. So that's not something schools can do, but it is absolutely the best way to work with someone. If you can just work with them on a small basis, see how they are, because even more than evidence is actually a trial working period with someone, that's like the next level. So that's what I do. And if there's any way schools can incorporate that into their recruitment, I think it's the best way to do it.
I like that model because I think you have a point. If you have a small project, you see not all the evidences are going to come to light.
Yeah, it's live evidence.
It's live evidence, and there's nothing like that. So Stacy, I think, what's interesting is I find this really innovative, and it's so great that an organization that does have a real global presence, and you have, I don't know how many readers you have, but I assume it's quite significant in the international school community. How is you as an organization, if you think all the changes since 30 years when you started, there's been so much change outside of schools, and schools have changed a bit. How do you as an organization stay agile and realize, oh, we need to be ahead. We need to be leading this more than newslettering it?
Well, I feel like I have to give, credit to the people who came before me and the people who led before me. And that would be, Brittany Betts, who was the CEO of the company for, a decade. And I think she really deserves a lot of credit for the innovations and the platform work and putting things together in new and innovative ways. Her background is technology and development, and so I think that's really, she's the one who's done so much innovation for TIE over the past 5 years. And I feel really lucky to be the educator that gets to step in and start to talk about it more and socialize it more. And I think that's one of the decisions that, Brittany's still with the company, still developing things and working on refining our products. But I think they were like, it's time to also try and put an educator out there in front who can talk about it like the way that I can, from the fact that I've been recruited and I've recruited, and to bring those two things together and that experience to kind of say, how can we do this better? And how are these innovations really better practice for us as schools? And so I think we'll continue to innovate. We're continuing to talk and think about how do we improve our growth and evaluation tool? What does 2.0 look like? And so I think there'll continue to be innovations around those areas. But I think that we'll always really stick in that realm of how do we amplify and elevate really strong teaching through whether it's promoting strong growth and appraisal practices or helping schools find the best candidates for their kids. I think that's probably the place that will really stay and will really focus, is how do we just keep finding the best people to put into our schools? And then how do we grow them and care for them while we have them?
So do you have a lot of interactions, back and forth, or do you basically create this platform and then people can grab it and interact with it? Or is there a lot of relationships that you're building with different schools to be more agile with what is needed?
I think we're in a place as a new person coming in and really reaching out and listening to people. I think one of the things that we're going to start to pivot to, and we are really starting to pivot to, is how can we provide more content for people? I think our schools are in a really big transition as a generation starts to leave schools. And then I think that there's that younger generation, like a lot of Gen Xers who are actually stepping out of schools.
Yep.
They may not be retiring, but they're moving on and they're doing different things outside of schools. And there's so many new people coming into leadership. So it's really from Ty's perspective, how can we put good content on the table, thinking about next year and starting the recruiting process? Like, what kind of resources can we put out there? What kind of trainings can we offer people to think about recruiting, to think about how do I check my bias as a recruiter? What are some of the strategies that I can employ? You know, we've luckily been doing a lot of work through the PTC on leading around DEIJB, and we have a lot of great people that we work with and resources to help kind of put some of these pieces, I think, together to put some resources on the table as people come into the profession as leaders, recruiting and hiring people for the first time. How can we support them? And how can we really support candidates who are coming into the system for the first time? I think one of the things I'm particularly really passionate about is how do we bring candidates into our system who haven't typically been a part of the system? How might we give people from countries where the passport doesn't have the same degree of value everywhere? What kind of resources and tools might we put on the table for them to help them navigate this? How might we help people who are over 55 navigate the landscape of international schools when we know there are so many places or countries that they can't go after 60 or 62? Like, what kind of resources might we be able to put on the table to help people navigate these things, to broaden out our talent pools? You know, because that's really what we want to see in our schools for our kids, and then really to help recruiters find greater diversity of people to bring into their schools for their kids who are mission vision aligned, who can present evidence against the standards of practices, so that you really have a high degree of confidence of who you're bringing into your school. It's like, how can we get more people into our system? Because our schools are struggling to find teachers.
Well, Stacey, I'm curious because obviously you speak to a lot of schools, and a really interesting point. John and me have spoke before on the pod, and we know people who've maybe they're 60 years old and they're having trouble getting jobs, especially in certain countries in Asia. Given the teacher shortage, which people say, I mean, you can probably tell us more about the trend. I know people think it's going to go parabolic in the next few years, given, first of all, there's so many more international schools, so much more demand for teachers, less people going into teaching and doing different things. Do you think that's going to change? Do you think schools are going to say, look, forget the 60 or 65, we're just going to take people to wherever? Do you think that will change, and you already see it changing? And do you agree about the teacher shortage going up more? 3 questions. Sorry, a lot of questions.
I think the teacher shortage will go up more because of the number of international schools that are continuing to come onto the market.
Yeah.
But I also think that's an opportunity in terms of local teachers who are teaching in those international schools that are getting exposure to those programs, that if they want to step outside of their home country and look for jobs in other countries, there's also a real opportunity to bring new people, I think, into the international school profession, because they're maybe working in their home country in an international school, and they may have a desire, at least for temporarily, to try and step out and teach in an international school in another country. So it could be a benefit in terms of giving us more people who are teaching in the programs that, you know, if you're in an IB school in India, well, there's IB schools all over the world. And if you've done the PYP and you have that training, that's going to be an advantage to you in being recruited and hired in another school outside of it. So it could be an advantage, but I think the pace of how the schools are growing is so fast. And then I think you even look at our home countries and they're struggling to find teachers. Well, there's fewer people interested in coming into the profession.
Do you think schools will raise the age limit? Do you think that's something you've heard people talking about? Or is it normally dependent on local laws? Is that normally the driver?
My experience has been on national laws.
Yeah.
So that's my experience. And it's always been any school I've been at. It hasn't been like a school rule. It's been, all right, it's China and we can't get you a visa after 60.
Right. So yeah.
You know, or how much are you willing to break the rules?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
People break the rules. So I think that really.
How do they break the rules? You mean they don't give the accurate age to the government or thing, or what's that?
I haven't worked in that school.
No, nothing you've ever done. I'm just curious.
None of my schools broke the rules.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do know people who are over, I've been in schools where people couldn't work past 16. I know people who were over 60 who sometimes, you can get a favor from the government, I'm sure, and things like that. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, I think most schools will probably follow the rules.
Yeah.
And I just think that's so sad to like tell 65-year-olds they can't be in our schools. It's like, what a loss,
Yeah.
for our
Definitely.
students. And I just think what a loss for like the information and the sharing and the growing that happens in a community that has teachers from all stages of their careers.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I,
It's interesting that you're bringing up this idea of ageism, because if you think, and I just think historically and in cultures and communities, older people were the wise people. You went to the wise people to sit and learn and pass on the cultural nuances and the cultural heritages, and there was a respect. And now it's like, oh, you're 65, you're useless, you're old school, you won't change. And
Yeah.
there's so many labels. And echoing the same thing is the same thing as if I'm, say, from the Philippines and I have a doctorate and I've been teaching for 20 years and I want to come to Europe. They're going to be like, well, you're from the Philippines, So you do get this. And I really want to thank you that you're bringing these two topics up, because I think it's so important. And how do we transcend this ingrained kind of myopic kind of narrow-mindedness? And when we realize the multiculturalism and multi-ageism only brings richer things, these two things, I think, is something that you as an organization, especially with DEIJB, you really made a very consecrated effort as that. Would you agree?
I would definitely agree that Thai, I mean, in my experience and what I understood about Thai and coming in, has a very strong commitment to supporting DEI JB work in schools. I think as a recruiting agency, we need to really be looking, thinking, and being strategic and supporting that work and representation in our schools. And I think that's the other side, the real opportunity we have is like, I think it's important for us to talk about these things, whether it's ageism or we value some passports and nationalities lower than others. And that's I think the powerful side of the newsletter side of Thai, is that space for people to share their stories, to share their thinking, and push people's thinking. I think that's the only way that we change it, is to talk about it. Whether it's DEI work or we're talking about ageism in schools, the only way to really move forward on any of it is to talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, we can't move forward on some of these conversations. And at the end of the day, I think it's always, we need to engage in these conversations and we need to share what we're thinking, from our schools outside into the wider community, because we're really trying to just put the best people in front of our students.
Why
Right?
why do you think then international schools around the world, and Dan's going to like this question, is that we talk about multiculturalism, we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and the B is belonging, correct, for well-being. Yep. So I just want, because you've been saying the acronym, so I want to remind people, when Stacy's talking about DEIJB, the B is belonging. We play, and I'm going to be very provocative here, we play a good game of multiculturalism, multi-ageism, and we're caring, but somehow when the rubber hits the road, we tend to fail sometimes at following through on that. What is it about international schools from your experience? And I'm overgeneralizing here. So,
Yeah.
but
not
I'm
much.
curious. Thank you, Dan. No, I think not much. You're right. And thank you for bringing that up. Why are we here still?
I mean, I think we're enormously, our history, our establishment, who established us, where they established us, now why we're being established as international schools is hugely complex. It goes to the university system in countries that people ascribe higher value to those systems, and international schools are seen as a pathway to that. I think it comes from the fact that many of our schools were established to serve people outside of their home country who were not staying for a long time and weren't making a long time commitment to a community. They were really only there for a short period of time, and there was an interest in allowing them to maintain their education and their lifestyle and their status, all of these different things. I mean, we are a colonial legacy. We are a legacy of globalization, a legacy of a Western dominated understanding of what it means and the value of a higher education. And we're seen as pathways to those. Our schools are highly transactional, in terms of we pay a lot of money. And so, well, then I want my kid to get into this school in Canada or Australia. This is my pathway. This is why I pay so much money. So we're highly transactional, and so there's
and that's really good to hear, because it's definitely the truth, but people often don't want to say it. It's one of the things that people don't want. The reality of the parents, speaking as an international school parent, I can see other parents, and it's definitely more certain nationalities. I can see it already, even at my young kids' age, they're more focused on their kids being successful than others in certain regions. But it's interesting that it is a reality of the international school world.
Yeah, but I think at that same time, there's also great opportunity by valuing like multiculturalism and multilingualism and talking about these things with students and understanding and ensuring that kids feel seen, they feel heard, encouraging kids to know their own histories, to value their own stories. I think that's the shift that we're seeing in our schools. And so we have a great opportunity in front of us to raise those values and it in our schools and see what that impact is on what those kids think about for the learning for their children. And how does that change how they see their home country, their opportunities in their home country when they've had more of their stories honored and they've had more of their own history honored, and there's maybe more pathways, in different directions, and it doesn't all just seem to lead in to a few places.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I really appreciate you going into depth and really giving that overview, because I think it's really helpful to have a point of reference when you're questioning. And I think we always have to be mindful that history is very complex and nuanced, and with history comes things that happen, and change can be challenging because we all kind of get stuck in our ways of thinking and ideas. You had mentioned also that the transition from Generation X, now there's some leaders coming in. Are we entering the Generation Z leadership cohort?
How old are they? Probably
1995, 96.
Does that make them 30? No.
Yeah, 30. Yeah, Generation Z. Am I right, or they are younger?
Millennials.
Millennials comes after Generation Gen X.
Gen X.
So are we in a millennial leadership cohort?
For sure.
Okay.
Millennials are 40 now.
Okay. So I'm just curious. So it's interesting because you're saying we have a whole generation that's retiring and moving on, and there's this new generation. Are you noticing trends with these generational trends as in your role?
I mean, I think, and this is something I really greatly admire, I think there's more conversations around wellness and balance and, really trying to take care. I think, education and teaching can be a very exhausting profession because the people that you serve are children and they're right in front of you every day. And there's a lot of them, right? They're very compelling reasons, and I think that they do a really good job of like really caring for kids, but also really thinking about their own balance and their own like boundaries in that. And I think I think they're more engaged in that conversation. And I think that that's going to be, I think it's a great model in schools. It's a great model for those of us in schools. That's something that I see as like a bigger conversation.
Nice.
And a bigger piece of what they're bringing. And I just think that the equity piece is so much more ingrained in them from a younger age than maybe it was for some of us who are older.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I know we think of the older people as being wise, but I think some of these younger people are so wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the danger, is that you label people by age on what their wisdom is or their capacity. And I think it's not the age, it's the mindset,
Mhm.
and I think it's about your disposition, your mindset, your capacity for agility and resilience. So you could be very young and be very non-agile, and you could
True.
be much older and be so.
I
I
think in
think
some ways young people are worse, because I think, like, we talked about online discussion, and I think almost no one in the history of the world has ever had their opinion changed on online discussion. Like and because of the nature of the algorithm, you look at certain content on X or YouTube or anywhere, and you get pushed down more and more of the same. And that's why I think it's things like this, in person discussions, where you really get an opportunity to get your mind changed by someone. And I think it's, like John said, I think it's people of any age can go, but just my opinion, I don't think it's very age specific. I think it's, you maybe there is some broad numbers to say that, but I would say it's much more on different people being open to think about things differently.
Yeah, I so agree with you, Dan. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Stacy, we have a school year ahead. There are a lot of things, AI is everywhere, and change and ethics, and there's a laundry list of geopolitics and climate change. It's just a laundry. But so, as an organization, how do you navigate this rapid change? How do you stay agile? Are you trying to demonstrate an agility so other people can tap into that kind of, disposition that you're demonstrating? Do you feel that you're kind of, as an organization, need to lead that, or need to maybe not lead it, but kind of demonstrate it, and it not by pushing it out to people, but by being who you are, and in being who you are, you show agility, equity, this idea of, being very flexible and open.
I think that a lot of that really comes from the newsletter work and, the people that we're trying to find to put really great information out there to put in front of people. Because the newsletter works in that, people come to us, but then we also really seek people out who we think are doing great work, and we want their ideas put out there to have that conversation to inspire that agility. So I think our agility comes in knowing what's going on and understanding what's going on and seeing what really might have some real relevance and real importance. Like, we've got a series going on right now about pathways in high schools. There was just a big conference in Budapest at AISB that brought, I think, 90 people together, and then another few hundred people, together online. So we've been really wanting to put that information out there, because that's really agile thinking. And I think where we have to be is connected to what's going on, so that we can see something like that and we can amplify it and bring more voices into the conversation. Because I think that is really, I think, the biggest role that we have on the newsletter side, is really amplifying some of the good work and good thinking that's going on in schools. And I think our agility comes around in staying plugged in and knowing and seeing the conversations that seem really important and sound really important, that will really push things forward and will really push conversations forward. And then I think we continue to do the good work that we're doing on the recruiting side to continually think and innovate. How do we keep finding and getting good candidates into our system to support schools finding great candidates and teachers for our kids? So I think the innovation is staying plugged in.
So tell us, how are you staying plugged in? What are some of the tools? What are some of the strategies? Because there's so many international schools, and always it's great when you talk to other international school teachers. They say, "Oh, we're doing this program." You're like, "Oh my God, that's amazing! How come we don't know about this?" Or whatever it might be. I mean, every school, there's just amazing stuff happening, because educators always just rise to that occasion of innovation and creativity. So how are you deciding, okay, this is something so for example, the high school pathways. So they're looking at alternatives to the IB exams and really looking at different pathways to demonstrate learning, so kids can get into university without maybe having the IB or some of the other markers. So how did you suddenly decide this is one we're going to need to focus on because it's going to get big? I'm just wondering, how are you plugged in and know what to be plugged in with?
Well, I think that's the being old part and connected and having been in international schools for 20 years.
Yeah.
I've just been to 2 different leadership conference and probably intersected with 300 different people from Europe to Asia and consulted in a couple of different schools. We're out there, we're connected. Our editor, Shwetangana, of the newsletter is also an international teacher in a school. Really, none of us are full-time. All of us are part-time, serving in other roles in education, whether that's in a school or outside of a school, supporting schools. And I think that's one of the ways that we stay really plugged in, is because we're still plugged into schools. We're not out of schools, we're in schools. And I think, PTC is a huge resource. I'll be at PTC this summer, intentionally crossing over 2 different courses. So I'm going to see like 6 courses in action. And it's really that visibility, that presence, the staying connected, paying attention on LinkedIn, paying attention, places like that, to find out what's going on in schools. I think part of it is like making sure we're still a part of schools. And I'm not just sitting on my couch in my pajamas every day. Some days,
Well, it's about well-being and balance, right? We were just talking
right.
about that. So the pajama moment is really important. Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I think that's the beauty of it. Like, for all of us who've been doing this, like, this is our community. This is our world. And this is the world that we know and the world that we love. And we're like, how do we get great people into this and then let them know about international teaching and the opportunities that it offers, and how do we help schools know about the great things that's going on in other schools that they may not be in their region and they may not be connected to. It's all about, I think, making connections.
Definitely.
So you make all these connections. Thai doesn't have much competition. There's not like another International Educator newsletter. I'm just curious because, in any industry, I know in Dan's industry, there are other people that do the same thing as him, and there's competition, and, there's just a market. The market is there. Is this unique for you to be in such a position that you don't have competition, or do you and we don't know about it?
Oh, I don't know what competition there is for just sharing great information about schools. I think all of the regional associations have their newsletters where they're sharing regionally, about those schools. I think those are really great sources of information about the schools in your area that you might know more about. So I see all of this as complementary.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
Right. I think it's very, very complementary. Where was I just at? I'm at ECIS, and I'm doing social media from Thai Online at ECIS. That's promoting ECIS and putting really good thinking and out there. And they're doing their own social media, but like, this is also complementary, I think, in helping and supporting each other. That, like, a rising tide floats all boats. Good
Nice.
information is good for everybody. And I think
Love
all
that.
of it is very complimentary about the information that different organizations are putting out.
Definitely.
I love that quote, rising tide brings up all boats. That's wonderful. Well, on that wonderful, thoughtful note, Stacy, what are 1 or 2 things you would like to share to teachers and leaders out there from your experience and to our audience? Just something that you think would be important for them to reflect upon as they look at the new school year ahead, 24-25.
I definitely would say, how do we innovate around our recruiting practices? How do we elevate how we look for teachers and how we hire teachers?
Yeah.
Because it is absolutely the most important job of a leader. And as a teacher who's looking for your job, how do you absolutely put your best self forward in order to find that best fit, that right school for you? I would say we need to innovate around our recruiting practices, both as candidates and as recruiters.
Fantastic. Stacy, thank you so much. I want to remind our audience, Stacy is the director of the International Educator. It's TIE online.com. And if you have not been there, do go over there and you can get a subscription, and they do wonderful work. And Stacy, thank you so much. I know this is kind of you've just joined. It's been a little under a year, and all the best as you continue. And thank you to your whole team for everything that you do, because I know as an international school educator, I don't know how many times I've turned to your resource or the newsletter. I love the blogs and a lot of the provocations and highlights that come out. So thank you to you for being with us today.
No, thank you. I really appreciate the time to talk about what we do. We're really proud of it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And we'll catch you on the next podcast. Thank you. This is the International Schools Podcast.